All right, this is a Fox News alert. Only moments after President Trump announced a ceasefire in the Middle East, Iran, in fact, launched drone and missile attacks against Israel and other nations in the Middle East. So that aggression does beg the question, can Iran be trusted? All right, here with our continuing coverage, we call him the Great One himself, the host of Life, Liberty, Levin. Mark Levin is with us. I guess the party line is that the message has not gotten down to the ranks in the battlefield that fired those missiles. I find that somewhat questionable, but, you know, let's see how that plays out. We'll know more by, I would say, the end of this hour or midnight tonight. Mark, I also have to go to the heart of what has to be a part of this deal. The Strait of Hormuz cannot be controlled by Iran. They cannot put a tariff on any ship that passes through that strait, number one. Number two, they cannot have 60% enriched uranium. The president has been unambiguous. He has been crystal clear. That has been the main goal from the very beginning. Under no circumstances do I see the president allowing them to keep that 60% enriched uranium. What's your thoughts?
All right, I think there's some fundamentals, some truisms here. Number one, thank God Donald Trump's president of the United States, because no president would have done what he's done and what he's doing. None. None, period. And that's my fear. If we're going to have some kind of deal, Donald Trump won't be around forever to ensure that it's enforced. That's number one. So I trust him. Number two, I don't trust the enemy. The enemy has shown for half a century that every deal it signs, it violates. So what's going to be different this time? What's going to be different 4 or 5 years from now? Number three, everybody says we don't want regime change. Okay, then we're not going to have regime change. So what does that mean? Well, the regime still exists. Maybe not the top 3 tiers, but the fundamentals are still there, and some strong man will rise to the top, as they always do. So that's a question. The president is up against really unbelievable obstacles. He has a Democrat Party that basically would rather destroy him than the enemy. And that is their focus. Number two is woke right, self-aggrandizing so-called influencers that are used by the media to attack him and to try and undermine his base. Number three, his base is solid as a rock. 100%, 92% are with him. That's the Republican Party. But there are other issues that nobody's talking about, and I want to raise them because at some point somebody's going to have to talk about it. What do we do to enforce whatever it is we agree to? How do we enforce it? Are we going to have a rearrangement of our military? We're going to have another base there? But how are we going to do that? Number three, what about the people of Iran? What, are we going to just leave them there? There's nothing that we can do and we're going to wash our hands over that? That to me is morally very difficult to accept. And then what about the proxies, Hezbollah? I was reading these statements. Hezbollah has killed more Americans than Iran directly. Hezbollah is Iran. Hezbollah is firing missiles into Israel by the hundreds still. And here we have a ceasefire that they've already broken. And so, yes, the argument will be, well, they don't have control of this and control of that. Well, if they don't have control of this and control of that, how do we even enter into an agreement? There's a lot of complicated issues still on the table. I trust President Trump. I know his heart. I know he wants to do the right thing. I know he has Lilliputians who are telling him to do something else. I know he has other advisors telling him to do something else. He's the most understanding, competent of the bunch, and he's the president of the United States, and his instincts are very, very good. But I would say this enemy is still the enemy. They're still surviving. Their military may be destroyed, but the Communist Chinese will still help them. The Russians will still help them to rebuild. And so this thing's not over. And it's not that I'm a warmonger. It's that they're a warmonger. It's not that I'm an interventionist. They're an interventionist. I agree with the president. We need to protect our country. We need to protect our homeland. And to pretend that this enemy hasn't killed American soldiers and American citizens is ridiculous. To pretend this enemy is executing its people left and right as we speak. This enemy is shooting missiles into not just Israel, I think some of the Arab countries tonight as well, as we've entered into a 2-week ceasefire. What is it exactly that we are going to be able to do that the Europeans weren't able to do, that the IAEA wasn't able to do, that prior administrations weren't able to do? We agree that Donald Trump is a once-in-a-century leader, which means the next leader and the leader after him, they're not going to be Donald Trump. And so somehow we have to figure out how to do something that's very complicated and difficult. These are terrorists. What makes anybody think that we're going to change their thinking? We're not doing regime change. Everybody says no regime change. Okay, then the regime survives in one form or another. The fundamentals survive. And so the question is, how do we keep this enemy, this poison, this cancer, these Islamist radicals, 7th century barbarians, how do we keep them in a box? And that's what we have to figure out. If we're not going to completely take them out because of the huge isolationist strain in the Democrat Party, among the woke right, but again, MAGA, the Republicans are behind the president. But if we can't do it because of the political wins, if we can't do it because of other reasons, then how are we going to keep them in a box? It can't be just peace in our time. We have a 10-point deal and they've agreed to this, this, this. I just think it's going to be very, very complicated, very, very difficult. And I would say this to the President of the United States. I personally know that you will do the right thing, that you're going to try and make sure that it works for now and forever. And so I have complete faith in this man because he's brought us to this point where he's blown out their nuclear systems, where he's taking out or trying to take out all the enrichment, where he is not taking them at their word, where he has used our military in one of the most brilliant, spectacular military campaigns in American history. I'm glad he's there as President of the United States. There's some very complicated and difficult issues on the table, and I think if anyone can handle it, he can handle it. But this enemy, make no mistake, they are the enemy. They're not going to go away if there's not regime change, and we're going to have to figure out, and it's not going to be easy, how to keep our foot on their throat. It's not going to be easy, especially since we change administrations typically every 4 or 8 years. That's it. I'm done. I pray for the president and our troops. I pray for the people in the Middle East. I pray for the people of Persia. And I pray this enemy drops dead. How do you like that?
I kind of like it. A couple of things, and I just get a quick comment back from you, Mark. Number one, we will remove any enriched uranium. I don't think that's going to be negotiable. The president confirmed that we are trying to arm the people of Iran. You can't win a revolution with a slingshot. Obviously, the proxies, we cannot allow them to revitalize their ballistic missile program. On top of it, there's got to be a trust and verify component of all of that. We can't stop the North Koreans, the Chinese, and the Russians from offering their technology and assistance the way they have, because they've helped them build up all of this. I don't have all the answers, but certainly that will set them back dramatically for at least a decade, as far as I can see. But it's more complicated than that. And hopefully, if we can get arms in the hands of the people, they'll take over. I'll give you the last word. We have about 30 seconds.
That to me is very key. I've been talking about that in multiple appearances here and on radio. We have to arm the people, because if we're not going to do regime change, they need to have the ability to do it. Reagan did it in Afghanistan. He did it in Nicaragua. He did it in Honduras. He did it in Angola. Donald Trump can do exactly the same thing. Somehow, some way, those people need to be able to get armed and need to take their future into their own hands. And I think they will.
I think with the freedom fighters against the Contras, it worked. The Mujahideen in Afghanistan helped beat the Soviet Union. That would be very effective. The great one, Mark Levin, thank you.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube, and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.